Jades na kuno amira itokta kere.
Well, there are a few things that we need to remember here.
Pari kosos ni guarda aqui na.
For one thing, Thomas should have already believed the disciples who were his closest friends who had seen the Lord.
Eigenlijk Thomas me será kere kabalo ko ako su otro discípulo ng abiseso ng amira Jesus.
He was so skeptical that he couldn't even trust his best friends.
Etatas na skeptiko ko ni sumiyo amigo na empora confia.
There's something very wrong here.
Ti algo pero besa kinang.
But there's something else here.
Pero ti algo otro mas tatumaloga.
Right after Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believe,"
Isora des Jesus akabibisa bendicionates ng kuno amira pero toka kere.
or John makes this comment,
Juan asiore e comentario aqui.
that Jesus performed many other signs that weren't written in this book.
O Jesus asiopi otro señal ng mas kunotas kibide buki aqui.
But these signs have been written so that you may believe, that you may have faith.
Pero es señal ng ki awaros kibi pas na po kere pas na po tin fe.
You see here, miracles, signs and wonders can serve as a basis for provoking or stimulating faith.
Tagar ng señal ng maravilla ng porta base pa provocar fe.
Even earlier in the Gospel of John, in chapter 10, Jesus says, even if you don't believe my words, at least believe on the basis of the signs that I've performed.
Asa de un capítulo más prome Juan 10 de sus tabisa, si bueno te quiere a mí, quiere siquiera el local en tu señal ng bota, mira cómo estás haciendo.
And John writes later in 1 John, he says, that which we have heard from the beginning,
Juan tabisa después en prome Juan, lo que conoce tende for de comienzo,
which we have seen with our eyes,
lo que nos mira con nos huevonan,
and our hands have touched.
y con nos manan a mí shikune.
He said, this we proclaim to you
Esta visa esa que está proclamando
concerning the word of life.
de acuerdo con palabra de vida.
So John is saying we've seen him, we've heard him, we've touched him.
Juan tabisa nos atende, nos mire, nos mí shikune.
And this was a reason for his readers to trust what he was saying.
Esa que está base, motivo para su lesadonan porque era y confía lo que tabisa na.
But this was not a faith that was just a blind leap in the dark.
Esa que no está fe que te diz bota bulas na que ciegamente de oscuridad.
It was not something that was opposed to reason and evidence.
No estaba algo que está contrario na razonamiento y evidencia.
Well, what about 1 Corinthians 1 and 2?
Tame o que hubo di 1 Corintios 1 y 2.
There the apostle Paul says that the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing.
Y na apóstol Pablo tabisa ko evangelio ta ko ikans pa esnan ko tabay perdi.
And in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, it says that the foolish person, so the natural man can't understand the things of the Spirit of God because they're foolishness to him.
Y 1 Corintios 3 también te dice que es natural no puede comprender cosas de Dios y Espíritu de Dios. Durante parte que can't pe.
The person does not have the Spirit of God. He's not spiritual.
Ene no tiene Espíritu de Dios y no está espiritual.
Some people say, look, Paul is opposed to reason here.
Te dice aquí nang Pablo ta opone parte di razonamiento.
We're preaching something that is totally irrational to other people.
O está predicando algo que está irracional para otra gente.
Well, what I like to say to people who will use that objection,
Porque como me gusta ver gente que está vincula objeción aquí,
I'll just say, keep reading 1 Corinthians.
te dice que sigue lesa 1 Corintios na.
You get to 1 Corinthians 15, and what is Paul saying?
Llega na 1 Corintios 5, quando que Pablo te dice na.
Paul gives a list of eyewitnesses to the resurrection of Jesus.
Pablo te dona lista di tutte a testigo a mira a resurrección de Jesús.
That Jesus appeared to Peter,
Jesús aparece na Pedro,
he appeared to the 11 disciples,
él aparece na Jesús discípulo nan,
that Jesus appeared to James, his brother,
aparece na Santiago su rumán,
who did not believe in him during his earthly ministry,
quien denotaba te quiere de Jesús na comienzo de su ministerio.
and he appeared to more than 500 at one time, and Paul said most of them are still alive.
Él aparece na más que 5 gente de vianto e di obi nang ainda na vida.
You can go ask them.
Vai puntra nang.
And of course, Paul says, and last of all, he appeared to me.
Por último, Pablo te dice, él aparece na amitame.
who had been a persecutor of the church.
Amit bata un perseguidor di iglesia.
So in that same book of 1 Corinthians,
De mesmo buki di 1 Corintio nang
Paul gives reasons for why we should take the bodily resurrection of Jesus as a historical fact.
Pablo dá um motivo nang di conosco tuma e resurrección de culpa de Jesus tume como hecho.
What Paul is opposing in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2 is pride, not reason.
Lo que Pablo está opone en 1 Corintio 1 y 2 está orgullo y no razonamiento.
We want to do it on our own.
Nos quer assim coisa para nós mesmos.
We want to fix our own problems.
Nós mesmos que direita, nós mesmos problema na resolver não.
The natural tendency is to say, not to say, God, I can't do this myself. I need your help.
É tendência não tá para pensar Deus me não pode dizer que me só me esteve ajudando.
And the message of the cross is foolishness.
Então o mensagem de cruz está coicans.
Because the crucifixion in the first century was seen as something that was horrible and degrading.
Also de primeiro siglo a crucifixião estava mira como algo horrível, algo que está rebajando.
How can I put my trust in a Messiah who died on a cross?
Como eu ponho minha fé de Messias que morreu na cruz?
Or the Roman or the Greek might say, how can I believe in this message?
Esta mostra com a boa aí Deus está disposto para vai para nossa salvação.
God isn't going to save us through some mighty, coming into a palace, that Jesus comes into some earthly palace.
Deus não está vindo para vai de palácio, na grande palácio aqui no mundo.
He comes through the humble way.
Jesus business, de maneira humilde.
He identifies with us in our own circumstances.
Ele identifica com nós em nossas circunstâncias.
He gets his feet dirty and his hands bloody.
E também assuja sua pia, ela assuja sua mão também com sangue.
So God is willing to sink to the very depths to raise us to the heights.
Pois Deus estava disposto para bater a profundidade na mais boa para depois para alçar na altura mais alto depois.
So this does not go against reason, but it goes against pride.
Pois não está vai coisa que não vai contra de razonamento, mas está vai se contra de orgulho.
You can imagine the first century Christians, yes, I'm the one who follows that crucified Messiah.
Eu imaginava esse cristiano de primeiro siglo de dizer, sim, a mim te sigue o Messias que agora crucificar aí.
But God raised him from the dead.
Pero Dios alante for de morto.
And that's why one theologian said this.
Ese teólogo avisa lo siguiente.
If Christ is risen, nothing else matters.
Si Cristo resucita, nada otro no es importante.
And if Christ is not risen, nothing else matters.
Entonces, si Cristo no ha resucitado, nada otro no es importante.
If Christ is risen, that changes everything.
Cristo resucita, esto cambia turcos.
If Christ is not risen, there is no Christian faith, there is no hope.
Si Cristo no ha resucitado, no tiene fe cristiana, no tiene esperanza.
So we see that the New Testament offers us good reasons for affirming the truthfulness of the Christian faith.
Entonces, mira que o Testamento não nos bom motivo não para realizar que o cristianismo é verdade.
For 2 years when I was in college, I went to a Muslim mosque.
Eu estava estudando, mas vai mosque de Islam de Mohammedan.
And it was a good opportunity for me as a Christian to get to know Muslims and developed a number of good friendships. And one day, Tamir, and I said, Tamir, why should I become a Muslim? He said, well, because Islam gives you purpose. I said, I have purpose. He said, Islam gives you a community.
Jadi Islam donava komunidad.
He said, Islam gives me a community. Christianity gives me a
Jadi
community.
gune kristianismo também donava komunidad.
And then he offered a few other things.
Ela ofrece algum outro coisa mais.
I said, got that, got that, got that.
Hindi gune may tinture sa inang também den kristianismo.
And finally, he didn't know what to say.
Na deswenta sa mas kikabisa.
Then he asked me, he said, Paul, why should I become a Christian?
Ela bira puntra ami Paul di kong ami loting ela puntra Paul di kome tingo bira Kristiyan.
I said, Tamir, I thought you'd never ask.
Hindi ko neta mir makere ko nunca lo no puntra.
I said, the reason you should become a Christian is because it is true
E motivo di kon lo tingo bira Kristiyan ta sobre eta verdad.
that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead.
Ta verdad ko Jesus alanta for di morto.
Muhammad died and remained in his tomb.
Muhammad amuri la queda den graf.
All these other world religious leaders remained dead.
Ture otro líder na religioso ta morto.
And also, the Christian faith invites us to check out its credentials.
Ando tame efe Kristiyan ta bisa nos invitanos bin check mi credencial nang wax ta kos ko tingo kere.
And that is why you read in for the book of Acts, for example.
Ando re botale sa porama de buki di Hechos.
That is, we read about how these disciples are eyewitnesses.
Nos teresa de hecho nang kwen disipulo nang tabata testigo nang amira.
They said, we can't stop speaking about the things that we have seen and heard.
Tabi sa nosong posto di pape to kante kos nang nos amira escucha.
We see Paul and other missionaries going from place to place, dialoguing and persuading people that Jesus is the Messiah.
A Pablo e outro apóstolo nang tabay di kami un lugar pa otro ta papia i convence nang persuadi nang panangkere.
We see that word defense come up repeatedly.
E palabra un defensa, e palabra ta bincada be dilante.
Paul and the others are giving a defense for why they believe what they do.
Pablo e outro nang tata dun un defensa pa lo qual nang tabata kere ihasi.
And so when Paul is giving his defense,
Ora Pablo ta dun su defensa.
he says these things were not done in a corner.
Ela dice cosa que no asoso de un huki.
This is publicly available knowledge.
Sa kita conocimiento públicamente kupo llega na je.
And if the disciples were preaching a message and Jesus had rotted in the tomb,
Ando si discípulo anda ta predica un mensaje, ando camina con Jesús, estaba ta putriendo de un graf.
they should have started in Athens or Rome rather than in Jerusalem, where this could easily be disproven.
Nami será kumisa na Athena of na Roma, y no na Jerusalem, mas na Jerusalem fácilmente na bora bisa nang non, da verdad.
The Christian faith is supported by very good reason and evidence.
E fe cristiana ta guardo sostenedor de hopi bom motivo nang e evidencia.
And for those who are searching, for those who are struggling to find answers,
Nang ta luchando, buscando pa, ya cierto contesta nang.
we see that the scriptures and the Christian tradition offer many, many good reasons.
Nós mira com escritura e tradição ng cristiana do na opi bom motivo nang.
I studied philosophy,
A minha estudia filosofia.
and I have found that the Christian faith makes the best sense of the way things are.
E a minha arranha com a fé cristã te sungo tem mais sentido para explicar com cos nang ta.
And I don't have to say, well, just believe the Bible,
A mim não tem que bisa diz que é Bible.
because some people will say, well, I want to know why the Bible is true.
Tu tinha de punto trabalho, me engano, se Bible é verdade.
And there are people who devote their lives to this and give reasons for why we can trust the Bible.
Tiene que dedicar na vida para buscar e do na motivo nang di com nós por confia Bible.
And for all of us, we may not have a PhD in philosophy,
Para nós tur, para nós não tem PhD em filosofia, grado em filosofia.
but we can be confident that the Christian faith does give answers, public reasons for why we should believe in Jesus.
Pero nós por confia que a fé cristã tá duna contesta e motivo nang publicamente como mira que tá vale a pena querer em Jesus.
And throughout the world, there is an increasing momentum in an area that is called Christian apologetics.
Durante o mundo, aqui no mundo tem movimento, momentum, aqui para algo que se chama apologética cristã, apologia.
which is giving a defense for the Christian faith.
Ese que menduna un defensa pa fe cristiano.
And it's very helpful for young people growing up.
Tamasha bom mes útil pa mucha ng young crescendo ahora aqui.
Within the church.
En iglesia.
Some of those children who are on the stage today.
Hasta mucha ng utabata aquí riba stage awe.
For them to be equipped before they go off to the university.
Anam por equipa prome kun namba universidad.
So often I encounter parents who say, we brought up our children in church.
Obviamente topa mayor na bisa nos alanta nos yun de iglesia.
And then they went off to the university and they were led off track.
Quando después na ba universidad tanto na descaria não sigue mais com a fé.
Sometimes I'll actually get on the phone and talk with those children.
Então timbiami ta yama e papi com algum je yunang ei na telefone.
And listen to their story.
Escucha na história.
And find out what, where things went wrong.
Pamisare unda coisa na vai robes.
And so it's important for us to allow our kids to ask important questions.
Pues é importante para nos laga permitirnos yunang hasi pergunta na importante kunang que hace.
And even if we don't have them,
quando assim nós não tinha contesta,
there is plenty of material for people to find to get those answers.
Mas o material que ne busca em haya não contesta não.
But rather than saying don't ask any questions,
em vez de bisa não se pergunta,
say that's a really good question.
Senhor, não, é uma boa pergunta.
Let's look into that together.
Haga nos vamos buscar passar junto, que te contesta.
There was there's a mother who contacted me. She's from England.
Mama toma contato comigo da Inglaterra.
And her son had grown up in a pastor's home.
Eu cresci de casa de pastor.
He went off to university.
Vai à universidade.
And within the first year, he had turned away from his faith.
Quando tempo me ai de universidade, ela lego mais sua fé cristã.
So this mother contacted me.
Mama toma contato comigo.
And she said, "What do I do?"
Ela disse, "Que me hace?"
And she then started to do research about the questions that her son was asking.
Então ela vai começar essa investigação tocante e pergunta na gusto eu estava tin.
And it took her some time.
Ela tomou tempo.
About a year.
Para fazer sua investigação quase ano.
And then said she was able to keep up with the strongest questions that he was asking.
Pero fez na eta para contestar esta pergunta na mais difícil que eu hace.
So she had to do some learning on her own.
Mama me será sim arriba su mês.
But she was so glad that there were answers available to
her. Pero estava contento que estava tin contesta na pé.
So we've talked a little about faith.
Pues eso para pentir que tocante fé.
We've talked a little bit about reason and evidence.
Nós para tocante razonamento, evidência.
But what I want to do is now come back to that question of doubt.
Vamos que vim back na pergunta de dúvida.
In Jude 22.
Em Judas 22.
We read the exhortation to show mercy upon some who doubt.
Está em exortação de nos mostra misericórdia arriba algum que dúvida.
Some people have great doubts.
Quem tem dúvida na mais grande.
Some people go through life and don't really have many doubts about Jesus.
Quem está vai dor de vida não tem mais dúvida tocante Jesus.
Or about big questions.
Não tem pergunta assim na grande.
But we see here that there is an important ministry that the church can have with those who do have doubts.
Pero nós também aqui na igreja por ter ministério importante para questão que tem dúvida.
Now some people say,
dúvida robes.
I mean, the book of James talks about the person who doubts is double-minded.
E porque de Santiago da papi over de ene que dúvida tão ene de dos mente.
Well, if you read in James 1 and James 4,
pero si vos lees Santiago 1 y 4,
the double-minded person is a person who wants to say, yes, I'm a Christian, but yet doesn't want to live for Christ.
Gente que te voy a describir como ene de dos mente, doblemente, tá ene que te dice, sí, está cristiano, pero menos que viva para Cristo.
Those are the ones who are double-minded because they say they want to believe, but then it says, but they love the world too much.
Nanta waro llamar dos mentes, nanta bisa kunanta querer en Dios y Cristo, pero nanta de otro manera nanta estima mundo.
And that's why James says, cleanse your heart, or purify your hearts, you sinners.
Santiago ta bisa purificar, limpia vosso coração, vosso pecador nang.
He calls them double-minded
Kaya manang dene di double mente.
because they are not pure in heart, not single-minded in their devotion to Christ.
Kasi não está puro de ng coração, não está comprometer com solo compromiso para com Deus, para com Jesus.
That's a different kind of doubt.
Ito outro tipo de dúvida.
But when we are talking about doubt, there are different types of doubt that we need to understand.
Pero nós para de dúvida, nós temos que compreender com diferente tipo de dúvida para nós realizar.
One of the things that we've talked about is intellectual doubt.
Una inanta dúvida intelectual.
People have questions.
Nantin pregunta.
And we see within the Christian faith that there is a good, strong resource for answers.
Nós mira de fé cristã que tem um recurso forte para dar uma contesta.
But it doesn't mean that we can answer everything perfectly,
Significa que nós podemos contestar turcos perfeitamente.
that we have exhaustive answers,
Nós temos contesta para turcos.
but that the Christian faith offers us the best resources for making sense of these questions.
Pero que a fé cristã é um de nós é melhor recurso não para dar uma contesta e tem sentido de contesta na aqui.
It's sort of like what Peter said when, in John chapter 6,
De maneira lo que Pedro avisa em Juan capítulo 6.
when Jesus was preaching to the crowds and some of them left Jesus.
Ora Jesus está predicar que a multitud e alguns não abandonam Jesus.
And Jesus said to his disciples, "Will you also leave me?"
Jesus apunta a seus discípulos, você também está abandonando?
And Peter said, "Lord, to whom else can we go?
Quando Pedro avisa, Senhor, uma mais nos pobai, sei que quem mais nos pobai?
You alone have the words of eternal life.
Solamente abo tem a palavra de vida eterna.
If you get rid of Jesus,
Bo, hale Jesus banda,
you're only making matters worse.
ota si cospió,
You're getting fewer answers if you get rid of Jesus."
ota ya menos contesta si bo, hale Jesus banda.
I remember one time hearing about a philosopher
Antes não via filósofo avisa,
who had real difficulties with he was a professing Christian,
uma história de filósofo que estava cristão, e avisa cristão,
and he really struggled with the problem of evil.
pero estava tinha uma luta com o problema de maldade.
Of course, this is a problem that everyone needs to deal with, not just Christians.
Sai que um problema cultural, tem que deal com ele, não somente cristiano.
And he said, "I just can't believe in a God who allows evil in the world."
Avisa, é filósofo que avisa, simplesmente não pode querer de Deus que te permitisse tanto maldade no mundo aqui.
And a friend of mine, another philosopher, Christian philosopher,
Amigo de mim, outro filósofo cristão,
he said, "Well, how does getting rid of God resolve your issues with, about evil?"
ele apunta, ok, a você boa, hala Deus banda, com essa que outra donava contesta para o problema de maldade.
And he confessed,
Confessar,
"Well, actually, getting rid of God has only made things worse."
e diz, se me hala Deus banda, pior é problema vira.
As I said, evil is a problem for everyone.
Não avisa, maldade é problema para tu rende no mundo.
And the question is not which perspective gets rid of all of our questions about evil.
E a pergunta não está agora qual a perspectiva está que está turnos dúvida não for de estudar problema de maldade,
But which one offers us the best resources for making sense of evil?
pero qual alternativa de nós é melhor recurso não para nós por compreender e sacar algo com sentido for de entender problema de maldade.
And in the Christian faith, we have a God who steps into our world of evil.
Então, de fé cristã nós temos Deus que está direto bem no mundo de maldade aqui,
Faces evil squarely on the cross,
e está atender com maldade riba cruz,
rises victorious,
e está lanta como vitorioso foi morto,
and guarantees that all evil and injustice will be taken care of.
está garantiza que toda maldade, toda injustiça, loardo atender com ele.
That all of our tears will be wiped away from our eyes,
Turnos lágrimas lo hará quitar fuera nos cara.
and that cosmic justice will be done.
La justicia cósmica los de al final.
So there are indeed intellectual doubts,
Pues verdad, tin duda ng intelectual.
but that's not the only kind of doubt.
Presente un único tipo de duda.
There is also what we can call emotional doubt.
Ting tambe duda emosyonal.
And I've met people that no matter what answers you give to them,
May ato pa hene kung importa ki contesta ba duna nang?
they'll say, but what about this or what about that?
Anda kita puntra pero kaya ba sagi, kaya ba jese, iese.
It's as though they never are content with any answer.
De manera nunca nanda satisfecho con yung contesta.
And what often happens is as you explore their own background,
Lo que te pasa todavía ba ba explorar ng mes background?
that their questions often come from a great deal of personal insecurity.
Pero ang pregunta nanda bindor di kun nanti hopi inseguridad personal.
Through bad relationships with their parents or their family.
Dor di relasyon ko tata fellow hopi difícil kun na mayor ng kun familya nang.
And so it's as though no answer can ever be enough.
Pero te pasa kun yung contesta no ta suficiente nunca.
So they need to address some more basic issues than just intellectual ones.
Pero nanting ko ba atender ko algún cosa ng mas básico ko solamente parte intelectual.
So that's emotional doubt.
Pero esa ita duda emocional.
But there is also another kind of doubt which is we can call moral doubt.
Yung otro tipo de duda también se nos teme duda moral.
Sometimes people start to have doubts after they have done something wrong.
Kaya niya tayo duda ora ko nakakabi si algo malo.
A guy starts sleeping with his girlfriend.
Tama to kumisa drumi ko sufrey.
And all of a sudden these doubts about God's existence come up.
Dawat in duda to kante di Dios su existencia.
And often if you can get God out of your mind, if you could say, well, maybe God doesn't exist, I don't have to be held accountable for my actions.
Antore si bo bisa, porta Dios de existi, boda sa ka Dios mo men, antore bonding do na kwenti rason pa bo akto nang.
So often there is a connection between someone's doubts and the decisions that they have made that take them in the wrong direction.
Pues hubiera un conexión entre un de su duda y decisión que la toma que te ve de mal camino, de mal dirección.
And sometimes it can be a very dramatic shift from believing in God and then they make a wrong decision, an evil, an immoral decision, and then they just live in the realm of doubt.
Y ti me aporta extremo también que nada si un mal decisión o un mal escojo, entonces nanta vai comienza viva un vida de duda.
That's a way of trying to alleviate one's own conscience.
Sì, è una maniera di purba di aliviare conscienza.
And there's a final category of doubt.
E c'è un'altra categoria di duda.
That we can say called spiritual doubt.
È duda spiritual.
Satan, of course, wants us to live immobilized lives so that we can't make progress in our spiritual growth.
Satanás que la que nos vive una vida que está inmovilizada, pero nos no llega na caminda, nos no llega con Dios.
That we can feel accused.
Nos está sintiendo acusar.
As Revelation says that Satan is the accuser of the believer.
Revelación dice Satanás es acusador de creyente nan.
And so we need to understand that if it were up to, we need to understand that it is not our own righteousness, our own moral purity that gives us right standing before God.
Sin comprender no nos mes justicia ni nos mes pureza moral, que talaga nos hanya un bon status delante de Dios.
But it's rather because of what Jesus Christ has done on our behalf that puts us in right standing with God.
Pero en vez de aceita lo cual Jesús hace aceita dona nos un status un bon camino que nos para delante de Dios.
You can say, yes, Satan is right. I'm a sinner. I've done this and that. I agree.
Nos podemos decir, sí, Satanás tiene razón, mi un pecado más y tal cosa, sí, me de acuerdo.
There's probably a lot more stuff that Satan has not said that we could apply to our
Y en
situation.
cosa me gusta Satanás no avisa por aplicar para nuestra situación.
But God, who knows us better than we know ourselves,
Pero Dios que conoce-nos mío, que nos conoce-nos mes,
we put ourselves into the hands of Jesus Christ.
nos ponemos mes de mano de Jesús,
If we say, nothing in my hands I bring,
nos pisa, no me te traes nada de mi mano,
simply to your cross I cling,
solamente mi cara na cruz,
we find right standing with God.
ahora nos tenha un bon status delante de Dios.
So when we deal with those doubts in our own hearts,
Ahora nos está diciendo que duda de nos mes corazón,
that Satan might be planting there,
Tudo na ku Satanas portapone de nós.
We say it's not about me, it's about Jesus.
Kung bisa no todo trata di ami, trata tocante Jesus.
Jesus is my righteousness.
Jesus ta mi justicia.
Jesus is the one on whom I stand.
Jesus es un lugar cual mi te para.
I have no hope without him.
Mi no tengo esperanza sin je.
If it were up to me, I'd be terribly lost.
Mi solo me estaba terriblemente perdí.
So as we look at what we've talked about this morning
Nos wakri ba lokal no sa papia we meinta.
about faith
Kante fe
as commitment and trust,
como un compromiso, como un confianza.
not something that is a blind leap without any evidence.
No algo que te diz bula de oscuridad sin nenhuma evidencia.
And as we look at the Christian faith,
Pero nos wak e fe cristian.
that also is very much in agreement with reason
Ta opi bea tata den un acuerdo ku razonamento.
and gives evidence for things like the resurrection of Jesus,
Ita duna evidencia pa costa manera e resurrección de Jesus.
and therefore gives to us reasons for addressing our intellectual doubts,
Pese de duna nos motivo na pa nos atender ku nos duda na intelectual.
but we also need to remember that there are other kinds of doubt that may need to be addressed.
Pues singo kara ku ting otro duda nan tamay ku nos ting atender ku ne.
But as we understand the nature of doubt,
Pero nos comprende a naturaleza de duda.
we can think clearly about which kind of doubt needs to be addressed by what means.
Nos pensa claramente qual tipo de duda melhor atender ku qual motivo nan.
So as we come back
Torna.
to Thomas,
Pero se nos vem back na Tomás,
he believed when he saw Jesus and said, "My Lord and my God."
ela quer la mira Jesus, andore di mi Señor e mi Dios.
And we see the Gospel of John is full of people who see Jesus doing signs and wonders and they believe.
Nos mira Evangelio de Juan, yen gente que mira Jesus así maravillas y milagros na inang a quere.
People are seeing evidence for the uniqueness of Jesus over and over again in the Gospel of John.
Tem o Evangelho de Juan, gente mira evidência cada vez trove de com único Jesus ta.
And you all have seen evidence of God's working in your midst.
Poso tur a mira evidência com Deus te tra den boso entre boso.
People being healed
Gente nanda waru sana,
in the name of Jesus.
de nombre de Jesus.
They had been sick, they've been made well.
Nanta bata malo na bira bom, na cura.
We see throughout the world as you know, there are people who are writing books about and documenting miracles that are happening throughout the world.
Mira ron mundo, nen describi buki nang documentando milagre nang kuna mira ron mundo.
And these are ways of encouraging our faith.
Sa kinanda manera nang pa encourajar nos fe.
I'll end with this story.
Mitas finaliza ko a historia aqui.
Our son Peter went to India a number of years ago as part of a summer missions team.
Monsieur Pedro, ela vai, Peter, ela vai India algum tempo passar pa viaje de evangelização.
So there are about 10 of my students who were with Peter in India during that summer.
So 10 de mis estudiantes andava junto com Peter na India e zomarei.
And the team leader by the name of Ben was asked to pray for someone.
Quando el líder do time que chama Ben na pedia para oração por ele.
And Ben, when he told us this story, he said the man for whom he was to pray said his body was like twisted into the shape of a pretzel.
Eta quando nós Ben quando nós e Hamburg que pedia para oração, su corpo estava achtur troste maneira forma de pretzel.
And he couldn't move from place to place without getting help from other people.
Tempora move vai nunca caminho se gente não ajude, mas sempre ajudança de gente.
And so the pastor who saw this young man come in said, "Ben, I want you to pray for him."
O pastor amira muito ambedrenda de Ben me que para oração pe.
So Ben thought, well, what if nothing happens?
Ben a pensei, o que te passa se nada não sucede.
But he sensed the Lord reminding him, well, this is why you came to India.
Pero ela sinto que Deus se recorreta, perceba bem India.
And so Ben said he started praying for this man.
Dore Ben a bisela começa a oração pe Hamburg.
Put both of his hands on his back.
E pone su duas mãos ribe Hamburg su lomba.
And then as Ben was praying, he said he could feel the bones in his back all moving into place.
Quando Ben andava a dizer, ora estava a oração para o homem, por assim, e o hueso não andava sul lombo, começa a mover, vai na lugar.
So by the time that this, Ben was done praying for him, this man got up and was walking and leaping like something right out of the book of Acts.
No momento que Ben acabou a oração para o homem, lanta começa a cana, mas com o que não se lê de book de Hecho não.
Our God is a God who does wonders.
Nosso Deus é Deus que traz milagre não.
And they're publicly available for others to see.
E não está publicamente disponível para tu render mira.
And as we go forth,
Ora nós vai adiante.
may the Lord use us to engage in those kinds of signs and wonders.
Sabe o Senhor usa nós para nós também vai assim tipo de milagre não em seu nome.
And also may people see the reality of Christ as we live our lives faithfully before a watching world.
E para não por mira também a realidade de Cristo de nos vida, ora o mundo está wack nos vida não.
By this all will know that you're my disciples if you love one another.
A meio dia sabe que tu rende los saco vos também discípulos se vos estima outro.
As the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said, "You are our letter, written in our hearts, known and read by all people."
O apóstolo Pablo escreveu na Coríntios, não vos da nos cartas que vi e conheci den coração andante.
May God bless you as you are witnesses and a light here in Curacao. God bless you.
Deus
Thank you very much.
bendicionar vos na hora vos anda testigo na aqui na Corsão. Deus bendicionar vos na.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for this wonderful sermon. I think it's been very insightful, and we have all enjoyed